The wind howled across the endless snow-covered plains of northern Kansas, on a deserted stretch of highway veiled in a thin sheet of ice. Snowflakes spun wildly in the air as if trying to drown out every last sound of life. At the end of this road, in the heart of a white void, stood a small, lonely diner like a dying lantern waiting for its final flicker. Its name: Juniper Diner. A faded wooden sign with peeling letters swaying in the wind, brittle under the skin-cutting cold. Inside, a dim yellow light flickered behind snow-covered windows, like life clinging to its final minutes. Once a bustling rest stop for hundreds of long-haul truckers, the diner now held only one soul: Elijah Cole, a 47-year-old owner, and the quiet sorrow soaked into every memory-laden wall. Elijah was once a trucker himself. Tall, sun-kissed eyes that used to shine like headlights during endless nights on the road. But now, his shoulders hung low, as if he carried winter itself on his back. In a worn, burgundy flannel shirt frayed at the elbows, he stood behind the counter making coffee, not for customers, just out of habit. His hands, which once fixed engines by feel alone, now wiped the spotless countertop over and over, dusting away time more than dirt. On the shelf behind him sat an old CB radio, covered in a soft layer of dust, like the ashes of memory. It had once been the heartbeat of Juniper, where drivers called out shared stories and asked for road updates. Now it sat silent, much like Elijah's voice slowly buried under snow and silence. The wall clock ticked on slowly each second, echoing through the vast emptiness. 4:43 p.m. Less than 20 minutes until closing, a daily ritual. Elijah kept up, even though no one had come through the doors in weeks. Not to make a sale, just to hold on stubbornly against the end. Upstairs in the small room above the diner, Elijah had lived alone since his beloved wife Marla passed away from cancer. They were once legends in the trucking world he drove. She rode beside him, journaling their trips, brewing coffee on a portable stove and snapping photos at every stop. When she died, Elijah stopped driving. He bought this diner, a place they had visited many times in their youth, hoping to keep her spirit close. But everything that once made a place home had now faded into echoes. The jukebox no longer played their favorite songs. Marla's laughter existed only in memory. The upstairs room now heard only the ticking heater, the wind outside, and the silence of a man quietly falling apart, unnoticed. He opened the drawer beneath the counter and pulled out a letter, folded and refolded. Too many times the final notice from the bank. The diner would be auctioned off by the end of the month. No more chances. Each day he opened the door only to feel the end coming closer. In the drawer there was barely over $2,000 left, not enough to save anything. Elijah stood still, his fingers trembling slightly as he closed the drawer, eyes fixed on the open sign in the frosted window. His hand rose, then stopped mid-air. A part of him wanted to turn off the lights, lock the door, go upstairs and let it all fade away. But somewhere deep in his chest, Marla's voice whispered, "Don't turn off the light. Someone out there might still need it." He sighed, letting his gaze drift over the cracked chairs, half-used tissue boxes, and fresh footprints still visible on the tiled floor. The diner was no longer full, but the scent of lemon from the floor cleaner and the hint of stale coffee still lingered like memories that refused to let go. Here, in the harshest winter in 15 years, Elijah stood in the shadow of his own heartache, unaware that in just a few minutes, everything would change. Not by miracle, but by the only thing he still had left: kindness. The snowstorm was no longer just weather. It had become a wild beast, snarling outside, furious and freezing, clawing at the road and breathing out gusts sharp as razors. Snow slammed against the windows of Juniper Diner, piling thicker with every gust. The distant streetlights had gone dark, or perhaps they'd simply been swallowed by the thick white fog. 6:47 p.m. Elijah glanced at the clock. 2 minutes crawled by like an hour. He stepped toward the door. hand reaching out to flip the open sign to closed. But before his fingers could touch it, a loud vibration cut through the silence. The tiny bell above the wooden door jingled a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. Elijah spun around, heart thudding. Standing at the doorway was a tall man, solid build, but worn thin by exhaustion. His heavy coat was dusted white with snow, and ice crystals clung to his beard like gray frost. His face was flushed from the cold, and in his eyes lived tension, caution, and a flicker of hope. "Evening," the man croaked, voice hoarse like it had been dragged through 100 frozen miles. I saw the light. Are you still open?" Elijah stood silent for a beat. He knew his situation. The power might go. Any minute, there wasn't enough food, and the heater under the counter had just made a worrying pop. He had only enough coffee left for a few cups, and the last of the roast beef could maybe make 2 sandwiches. 2 voices rose inside him. Turn off the lights. Send him on. The diner's dying. What good can you do now? But then... A memory tugged at his chest. Thin as thread, but strong. A winter night 20 years ago. Elijah and Marla stranded on a snowy Wyoming pass. Starving car, broken nothing around. Except for one farmhouse nearly 2 miles away that opened its door. They never forgot the warm soup, the glow of that fireplace. Elijah gave a small nod. "We're still open. Come on in. Coffee's still hot." The man gave a tired smile, relief softening his guarded face like a sailor spotting a lighthouse in a storm. Snow dripped from his coat with each step as he entered. His name was Jonas Miller, a long-haul trucker trying to cross Kansas to make a delivery. But the storm had blocked the roads. GPS had died, and the nearest rest stop had filled up hours ago. He slid onto a stool, cradling the coffee. Elijah poured like it was a cup of life itself. Not 3 minutes later, the bell rang again. This time 2 people. Long coats, scarves pulled tight. Faces, pale hands trembling. They didn't speak at first. Just stood there, eyes pleading silently through the frost-covered glass. "We saw the truck out front." One of them finally said, "Is there room inside?" Elijah glanced at Jonas, then at the 2 new arrivals. A freezing gust swept through the half-closed door, howling like a ghost. Almost instinctively, Elijah nodded. "Sit wherever you like. I'll make more coffee." And just like that, it began. Every 2 or 3 minutes the bell rang again, each time a new face. Old, young, mostly drivers, their coats soaked with snow, eyes anxious, voices cracked from the cold. They crowded in, saying little, asking only one thing. "Are you still open?" Elijah stopped counting how many names started to echo around the diner. Benny, Carlos, Hugh, Sandy, Rick. All different, yet all sharing one thing. Eyes quietly grateful for a light still shining in the dark. 13 p.m. Half the tables were full. Elijah was moving constantly, pouring coffee, stoking the heater, firing up the old kitchen stove. His hands trembled, not from exhaustion this time, but because for the first time in a long while he wasn't alone. Back in the kitchen corner, he whispered, "Marla, you see this, don't you? People need this place. Even just for tonight." A voice called out from the counter. "We don't want to be a burden, sir. If you don't have food, we're okay. Just staying warm. We won't ask for anything." Elijah turned, eyes steady. "If I've got anything, I'll share it. I'm not letting good people freeze to death out there. Not while I'm standing in a house with a heater." Then he looked over at Jonas, voice low but unwavering. "Tonight, Juniper Diner is not closed. Even if it's just coffee and eggs. We're open. Anyone who needs shelter, let them in." The storm still howled outside. But inside that little diner beneath the soft yellow lights for the first time in a long while, Elijah felt his heart begin to warm. 7:45 p.m. No one could say exactly who the last person to enter was, or how many times the doorbell had jingled in the past half hour. Outside, the snowstorm still raged, like the sky was dumping an entire frozen ocean onto the earth. But inside Juniper Diner, a different world had taken shape. Small, fragile but alive, like a heart just waking from a long sleep. Elijah stood behind the counter like the conductor of a strange little orchestra, left hand pouring coffee, right hand flipping eggs, eyes scanning every corner, every face, every worn red booth. Now had someone in it. Every table now hummed with murmurs of gratitude. Soft sighs and the quiet clinking of metal spoons in old ceramic bowls. No one demanded anything. No one complained. Just nods and silent handshakes between people who didn't even know each other's names. Jonas, the first trucker to arrive, was now handing out napkins, pulling out chairs for newcomers, introducing people. Like he was the host of an impromptu gathering. This is Carlos. He's been driving 10 hours straight. Over there is Sandy. She's new, but tough as nails. Tara, a waitress who used to work at the diner during slow winter days, appeared suddenly despite Elijah having told her to take the night off. Her brown hair was tied up in a bun, her thick knit coat dusted with snow, but her eyes were lit with fire, a flicker of warmth in an ice cave. "Couldn't leave you alone," she said, and without waiting for a response walked straight into the kitchen. They found a bit of ground beef, a few loaves of bread, some eggs, canned beans, and 3 bags of frozen donuts left at the back of the freezer. Tara glanced around, then pulled out a small notebook and quickly jotted down a rough menu. Pan-fried meatloaf sandwiches, scrambled eggs with spicy beans, thin chicken noodle soup, dessert, reheated donuts with jam. Elijah looked at the modest supplies and let out a quiet chuckle, not because it was funny, but because something inside him had come alive again, the energy he thought he'd buried long ago. He patted Tara on the shoulder. "Just make it like you used to for the college kids. Doesn't have to be pretty, just warm and filling." Every time the pan sizzled, the whole diner seemed to pause for a second. The scent of eggs, sautéed onions, and seared meat rose like a promise of life. Returning. Some people even looked up as if they'd momentarily forgotten how the cold had wrapped their bones. Not an hour before, Rick, an older trucker with silver whiskers and mountain-dry eyes, sat at the end of the counter and reached for a donut. "No one uses soybean oil to fry anymore," he muttered with a gravelly laugh. "But this smell. God, it's like 1986 all over again." Then there was Caleb, a skinny young man, barely in his 20s, coat torn and stained. He bowed his head over his small meal, 2 fried eggs and a slice of toast, slightly burnt. "I don't want to trouble anyone, really," he said softly to Tara as she topped off his water. "We can eat less." Tara smiled, her voice firm but kind. "We've got more than just food, Caleb. We've got more than fear." As the night deepened, the diner began to feel like a tiny world unto itself, where time was no longer counted by clocks, but by moments. Stories began to rise, weaving together like forgotten pieces of a shared past. Jonas spoke of a breakdown in Oregon when an old woman brought him stew by the roadside. Carlos remembered his early days sleeping curled in the back of a truck in 20 degrees. Sandy, small, sharp-voiced, and strong, told of being stranded on a mountain pass right after her divorce. Dinner that night was a pack of crackers and an old song on the radio. No one judged. No one interrupted. Only listening, the kind that had become a luxury in the noisy world outside. From the kitchen, Elijah looked out and no longer saw strangers. He saw a family not bound by blood, but by a quiet shared faith. The belief that somewhere along the stormy road there would still be a home with its doors open, a table with warmth, and someone who still believed in kindness. 10:32 p.m. The storm continued to roar outside, but inside Juniper Diner the world had grown still, as if winter itself had been stopped at the door. Elijah stood in the middle of his diner, once a cold tomb of loneliness, now filled with sound, the soft clinking of spoons on bowls, laughter breaking free after an old joke, the hiss of coffee being poured into mugs, and most of all, the sound of his heart beating steady, warm, as if Marla had just passed by and smiled. 45 a.m. The storm still hadn't passed. Snow had piled high up to the windowsills, and the trucks outside were now barely visible under thick white humps, with only faint glows of light from within. The wind still howled as if winter were playing its final symphony. But inside Juniper Diner the heater still hummed, the lights still shone, and the breath of over a dozen souls kept alive, something Elijah thought he had lost forever. Caleb dozed on a chair. Rick, the oldest of the group, had draped his own coat over the young man's shoulders. Sandy brewed the 8th pot of coffee that night. Tara laughed, her hair a mess. Her clothes dusted with flour, but her eyes sparkled with fire. Jonas lay curled on a booth bench, still holding his coffee cup, as if it were a precious gift. Elijah stood silently behind the counter, holding a rag he hadn't set down in nearly 10 minutes. His heart felt full, not with sadness, but with a strange, nameless feeling, gentle aching on the verge of overflowing. He had thought this night would be the last for Juniper Diner. The food had nearly run out, the bills were piled high, and the bank had given him just 10 more days before they would post an auction sign on his door. And yet, though he hadn't earned a single extra dollar, he felt like he had more than just a chance. He had hope again. 7:06 a.m. The storm began to ease. From inside the diner, a few people pulled back the curtains. The first rays of sunlight were breaking through the gray clouds, revealing a sky painted in soft silver. The snow was still deep, but now it looked calm, quiet. The wind had stopped screaming. Now it only sighed like a tired beast at rest. Then a strange sound emerged, the low rumble of diesel engines rolling in from the distance. At first just 1, then 2, then 5. And then an entire convoy of trucks pulled into the snowy lot of Juniper Diner. Elijah furrowed his brow and stepped outside. What he saw stopped him in his tracks. Nearly 20 trucks, one after another, eased into the parking lot. Each carried a different company logo. Some big-name logistics firms, some small regional outfits. He didn't recognize most of the names, but he saw the same thing in every driver's eyes: sincerity, resolve, and gratitude. Jonas, the man who had arrived first the night before, stepped beside Elijah and smiled. "We made some calls. Told the others on the road about this place. About a man named Elijah Cole who kept his light on for 14 strangers. A middle-aged man approached and extended his hand. Will Porter. I run the fleet at Porter. Logistics. We drive this route every week. I'd like to register Juniper as an official stop." He pulled out a printed contract draft, the ink still fresh. "We need places to fuel up, rest, grab a hot meal. But more than that, we need places where drivers are treated like people." Before Elijah could respond, a silver-haired woman with a sturdy build stepped forward. "I'm the regional manager at Sterling Supplies. We'd like to provide a standing order of food. 50% off. This diner needs to stay alive." Another man raised an envelope, thick and stuffed. The drivers chipped in. Everyone who heard the story last night sent something. Might be enough to save the mortgage. And fill your freezer. Elijah opened the envelope. Thousands of dollars. Cash bills smudged with grease sweat, and silent gratitude. His eyes turned red, his throat tight. Just then Caleb stepped forward, holding something wrapped in an old rag. "I don't know if you remember, but a few months ago you helped me change a tire in New Mexico," the young man said. "I was nobody. But last night someone gave me a radio. I think you should have it." He unwrapped the cloth, a CB radio mic, worn but still gleaming where fingers had held it over the years Elijah took it, hands trembling not from cold, but because this was a piece of his life, returning to him. A reminder. He had never truly been forgotten. He walked slowly to the counter's corner, where the old CB radio still sat beneath a thin coat of dust. He plugged in the mic, flipped the switch. A click, and then the air came alive. A voice crackled through the static. "Breaker 19. Anyone at Juniper? Heard the place kept its lights on last night. If so, I just want to say thank you. That light, it reached farther than you know." Elijah picked up the mic, voice low but steady. Juniper's listening, and the lights still on. Silence, then clapping at first, scattered, then rising, then thunderous. Tara wept. Jonas turned away, hiding his tears. Caleb smiled shyly. And Elijah, a man who thought he'd lost everything, suddenly realized he had more than he ever dreamed of. A home, a community, and a reason to keep going. 1 year later, winter had returned. Snow still fell across the misty roads of Kansas, and wind still whistled through the bare fields. But at a quiet crossroads along Highway 42, in a land that seemed forgotten by time, one place still kept its lights on Juniper Haven. Formerly, Juniper Diner. New name chosen by the truckers themselves, a tribute. Haven, a shelter, a place to pause, to survive, to heal both body and soul. The new sign was hand-painted on pine wood, trimmed with soft yellow LED lights glowing bright, even in a snowstorm. Below the name, in bold, small letters, it read, "A light for every traveler." The parking lot had been expanded enough space now for 25 semi-trucks to park comfortably. There were dedicated lanes for refrigerated rigs, a small fuel refill station added along the side. A brand new driver rest wing stood beside the diner. 3 hot and cold shower rooms. A billiards room with 2 old pool tables donated by people who just wanted to see them come alive again, and a tiny library corner inspired by Tara. Inside the diner hadn't changed much. Elijah had insisted. The old tile floor remained. The worn red booths had been patched, not replaced, and the photo of Marla still hung in the same corner as it always had. But now it was surrounded by dozens of new pictures. Truckers grinning wide behind plates of breakfast. A shot from last winter's first snow with the caption, "We remember that night." A hand-drawn piece by Caleb. A little truck pulled over before a house glowing with warm light. The old CB radio still worked. Any time of day or night, someone might call in, not for directions, but simply to ask, "Got a spot for the night? Any coffee left? Is Elijah still on the counter?" And Elijah's voice, low, warm, steady as ever, would answer, "Coffee's still hot. There's still space, the light's still on." Tara was now the night shift manager, handling table assignments, meal coordination, and schedule rotations. Calm, quick, and always knowing who needed a hug more than a hot cup of tea. Caleb, the once shy boy who didn't want to be a burden, now managed the storeroom, keeping stock organized from the growing list of local suppliers. He had taped a big sign to the storeroom door. "Don't let anything go missing," because Elijah never let anyone be. Jonas, Rick, Sandy, and many others still stopped by from time to time. No one needed to invite them. They came because Juniper Haven needed them, and they needed it. One late afternoon in December, as the sky turned violet and snow began to drift again, a truck pulled up outside the diner. The driver was a silver-haired woman with steady eyes. Her grandson slept soundly in the back seat. She opened the door. The little bell jingled. Elijah was wiping down the counter. He looked up and smiled like he had been expecting her. "Are you still open?" the woman asked. Voice rough from the wind. Elijah nodded. "There's coffee. There's a seat. And the light's still on." The woman sat down, hands wrapped around a hot ceramic mug passed to her. She looked around, truckers laughing, Tara slicing apple pie, the radio softly crackling with road chatter. She said slowly, "They say, somewhere along these long roads, if you're lost, frozen, and tired, you just have to look for that quiet yellow light, and you'll know you're home." Elijah didn't answer. He simply nodded, because he knew this place was never just a diner. It was a promise, a memory kept alive by kindness, a beacon in the storm. Not for money, not for fame, but simply because it was the right thing to do. Outside, snow began to fall again. But inside Juniper Haven, the fire still glowed red, and the light was still there, not just in the ceiling, not just in the windows, but in the eyes of those who had once been lost and had finally been found.